All right, let's talk about America's first war on terror. It's a mostly forgotten conflict that's got everything: pirates, ransom, and a brand new nation fighting for its life on the world stage. Today, we're diving deep into the First Barbary War. So, picture this. You're a young nation feeling pretty good about yourself after beating the world's biggest superpower. But here's the catch. Your freedom basically ends at the coastline. This pretty much sums up the humiliating reality. American ships were being hunted down, their sailors captured and sold into slavery, and the U.S. government was forced to pay what was really just protection money to the Barbary states of North Africa. All that just to be left alone. So, who exactly were these guys? Well, they were the feared Barbary corsairs. They operated out of places like Tripoli, Algiers, Tunis, and Morocco. And for centuries, they had this brutal, but you gotta admit, highly profitable business model. They'd seize ships, enslave the crew, and then demand a huge ransom. It was basically state-sponsored piracy on an industrial scale. And you can imagine, for the brand new United States, this whole racket was a huge threat. I mean, how are you supposed to build a nation of traders, a commercial republic, when your ships can't even leave port without getting captured? This was the price of passage, and it was a price America was really struggling to pay.
Yeah, things went south, and they went south fast. See, when the U.S. was allied with France, American ships had a little bit of cover. But after the Revolution, they were totally on their own, and the pirates of the Mediterranean definitely noticed. The attacks started almost immediately. The Betsy got taken in 1784, and then 2 more ships in 85. The message from the Barbary states was brutally simple: pay us, or your sailors and your business are going to suffer.
So when American diplomats, including future presidents Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, went and asked, "Hey, why are you targeting us?" this was the chilling answer they got. It wasn't just about the money. The ambassador basically said it was their religious duty to plunder and enslave any nation that hadn't acknowledged the prophet. So this wasn't really a negotiation. It felt more like a holy war. The gap between these two worldviews was just enormous, which made a simple diplomatic fix seem pretty much impossible.
And that fundamental clash brings us to the huge debate that defined America's response. What was the right move? Should they just give in and keep paying the tribute, or was it time to draw a line in the sand and fight back? I mean, this was about money, for sure, but it was also a debate about honor, and really, about the soul of the new nation.
So on one side, you had the pragmatist, John Adams. He's looking at the books and saying, look, we're a young country, we're drowning in debt, we simply can't afford a navy, let alone a war. So for him, paying the tribute, as humiliating as it was the only practical choice. But on the other side was Thomas Jefferson. He saw paying tribute as a total dead end, just a sign of weakness that would only lead to more and more demands. For Jefferson, the only honorable and ultimately the only sustainable solution was to fight.
And by 1801, these two totally opposite ideas were perfectly embodied by the two main figures in this whole conflict. On the left, you've got the newly elected president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, who had been arguing against paying tribute for years. And on the right, you've got Yusuf Karamanli, the ambitious and pretty demanding Pasha of Tripoli, who was about to put Jefferson's beliefs to the ultimate test.
The second Jefferson took office, the Pasha of Tripoli saw his chance. He didn't just ask for tribute, he made a demand that was clearly designed to start something: a fresh payment of $225,000. That was an insane amount of money back then. We're talking over $4 million today. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a direct challenge.
Jefferson, finally in a position to do something about his long-held beliefs, just flat out refused. And the Pasha's response? It was swift, it was brutal, and it was deeply symbolic. He didn't send a letter. He sent his men to the American consulate to literally chop down its flagpole. On the Barbary coast, everybody knew what that meant. It was a declaration of war.
So, that was it. No turning back. Jefferson, a guy who famously distrusted big, standing armies, now had to send the tiny U.S. Navy halfway around the world to fight a war. For those young sailors and their untested ships, this was going to be their very first taste of combat on foreign shores. The war was on, and the Navy was about to get its first real test.
The war started with a blockade of Tripoli, but then, in October 1803, the absolute unthinkable happened. The USS Philadelphia, one of America's best warships, ran aground while it was chasing an enemy ship. It was captured, totally intact, along with its captain and over 300 crewmen. This wasn't just a setback, it was a catastrophe, a total national humiliation.
I mean, for the Pasha of Tripoli, this was like a gift from heaven.
He gets a state-of-the-art warship to add to his fleet and hundreds of American hostages to ransom. For the United States, it was a moment of absolute crisis. But you have to wonder, in the middle of a disaster like this, could there also be an opportunity? An opportunity for some unbelievable heroism?
And that's where Lieutenant Stephen Decatur comes in. In a raid that would become legendary, Decatur led a small team of volunteers, disguised in a captured enemy boat, and sailed right into Tripoli harbor on a moonless night. They boarded the Philadelphia, took care of the guards, and then set the whole mighty warship on fire so the enemy couldn't use it. It was an act of just incredible bravery. One admiral called it the most bold and daring act of the age, and it made Stephen Decatur a national hero overnight.
But burning one ship, no matter how heroic, wasn't going to win the war. The Pasha still had over 300 American hostages. To really turn up the heat on Tripoli, the Americans needed a new plan, a really desperate gamble that would take the fight from the sea right to the shores of Tripoli itself.
So this plan, cooked up by a fiery ex-army officer named William Eaton, it was so audacious it was borderline insane. Okay, listen to this. Eaton goes to Egypt. He puts together this ragtag army of about 500 Greek and Arab mercenaries. Then, along with just 8 U.S. Marines, 8, this unlikely group marches 500 miles across the brutal Libyan desert to attack Tripoli's second biggest city, Derna. It sounds like a movie plot, right?
And against all odds, it actually worked. In April 1805, Eaton's small force, with some covering fire from U.S. warships offshore, they launched this attack and they captured the city of Derna. This was the moment the war really turned. It was the first time the American flag was ever raised in victory on foreign soil, and it sent a shockwave through Tripoli. Suddenly, the Pasha wasn't just dealing with a naval blockade, he had an enemy army on his own land.
That stunning victory at Derna gave the American negotiators exactly the leverage they needed. With an enemy army now on his soil, the Pasha was finally ready to talk peace. But the treaty that they ended up with, well, it was far from a clear-cut victory, and it led to this unsettled peace that left a lot of people, especially William Eaton, feeling totally betrayed.
Because even after this incredible military success, the final peace treaty included a payment of $60,000 to the Pasha. Now, the Jefferson administration argued, no, this isn't tribute, it's a ransom for the crew of the Philadelphia. But for guys like William Eaton, who had literally marched through hell and risked everything, it felt like a slap in the face. A victory won with blood and guts had been, in their eyes, given away at the negotiating table.
So who really won the First Barbary War? Honestly, the debate is still going, and there are strong arguments on all sides. You could say it was an American victory. It proved the U.S. could project power across an ocean, and it really forged the Navy in battle. But you could also call it inconclusive. Piracy didn't actually stop. Algiers was right back at it a few years later. And hey, from Tripoli's point of view, it was a success. The Pasha kept his job, and he still walked away with a big pile of cash.
But no matter who you think won, the war's legacy is undeniable. It cemented the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps as permanent, battle-tested institutions. It gave us that famous line, "To the shores of Tripoli," in the Marines' hymn. It created America's first post-Revolutionary War hero in Stephen Decatur. But, and this is a big but, it didn't solve the problem for good. It took a second Barbary War, a decade later, to finally put an end to paying tribute.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to chew on. This was a messy, complicated, controversial war. But in fighting it, the United States took its first shaky steps away from isolation and toward becoming a global power. So how did this strange little war against pirates, half a world away, help define the kind of nation America was going to become? It's a question worth thinking about because it set a precedent for American intervention that still echoes today.